They say hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, but real revenge isn't screams or tears. It's a cold smile and a signature on a multimillion-dollar check. When I saw Preston kissing her in Bali while I nursed his mother, I didn't break. He forgot that while he earns the money, I hold the keys. Within 48 hours, I will liquidate his supercars and lake house, making him the wealthiest homeless man on paper. My name is Caitlin Montclair, and standing in the center of a kitchen that cost $200,000 to renovate, I felt less like the queen of my castle and more like a highly paid servant. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Mercer Island estate, illuminating the polished quartzite countertops where I was currently arranging a kaleidoscope of pills. Beta blockers, blood thinners, pain management. My mother-in-law, Martha, was recovering from open-heart surgery in our guest wing, and since the night nurse had called in sick, the duty of keeping Preston's mother alive had fallen. As usual, to me, Preston, of course, was gone. He had left 2 days ago for a high-stakes technology conference in Silicon Valley. He had given me his usual speech about networking and the grueling schedule of a venture capitalist, kissing me on the cheek with a distracted air before hopping into an Uber Black to the airport. He claimed he didn't want to leave his precious cars at SeaTac exposed to the elements. I capped the final bottle of medication and sighed, wiping a non-existent smudge from the counter. The house was quiet, that heavy, expensive silence that only money can buy, broken only by the hum of the Sub-Zero refrigerator. I glanced at the charging station near the mudroom. Preston had left his secondary smartwatch behind. It was a sleek black device he usually wore for golfing. We had synced our devices years ago for safety, a feature he constantly complained about, but was too lazy to disable, out of idle curiosity, or perhaps an instinct I hadn't yet learned to trust. I tapped the screen. I expected to see a location in Palo Alto or San Jose. The screen remained dark. Offline. That was strange. Preston was a man who lived and died by his connectivity. For his GPS to be inactive meant the device was dead or deliberately disabled. I frowned, checking the last known location. It showed our driveway. 48 hours ago. He hadn't turned it on since he left. My phone chimed on the counter, the sharp sound cutting through my thoughts. It wasn't a text message. It was an email notification. I picked up my phone, wiping my hands on a dish towel. The sender was an address I didn't recognize. Serena Loves Life. The handle itself reeked of desperation and cheap perfume. The subject line, however, was a bucket of ice water thrown directly into my face. You should know who your husband is spending money on. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a physical reaction that seemed disconnected from my brain. My brain was already trying to rationalize it. Spam, phishing, a mistake, but my fingers, trembling slightly, tapped the screen to open it. The world didn't end with a bang. It ended with a download bar filling up to 100%. The first image that loaded was high definition. The colors saturated and bright. It was a selfie. In the foreground, a woman who looked no older than 24, with skin that had clearly never seen a day of hard labor and blonde hair perfectly tousled by the ocean breeze. She was stunning in the way Instagram models are stunning, manufactured, polished, and hungry. But it was the man in the background that made the air leave my lungs. Preston. He wasn't in a conference room in Silicon Valley. He was wrapped in a linen shirt, unbuttoned halfway down his chest, holding a tropical cocktail with a garnish that looked like a firework. He was laughing, his head thrown back in a way I hadn't seen in years. They were framed against the unmistakable turquoise water and dramatic cliffs of a 6-star resort in Bali. I swiped. The next photo was a close-up of a hotel invoice. The numbers were staggering. $15,000 a night for the royal villa, champagne breakfasts, spa treatments totaling $3,000. I swiped again, a screenshot of a text conversation. The contact name was My VC King, Serena. Are you sure she won't suspect anything, Preston? Don't worry about Caitlin. She is too busy playing nursemaid to my mother. Besides, she is too boring and old to figure out how to track me. I promise. Baby, after this deal closes, I am filing the papers. I need someone who matches my energy, not a dead weight, boring, old, dead weight. I was 36 years old. I was a respected art appraiser and a certified asset manager. I had put my own career on a slow track to manage his family, his mother, his social calendar, and his ego, and this was my return on investment. My hands spasmed. The bottle of hydrocodone I had been holding for Martha slipped from my fingers. It hit the Italian tile with a sharp crack, the orange plastic shattering and sending white pills skittering across the floor like tiny mocking pearls. I gasped, dropping to my knees. My instinct was to clean up, to fix the mess, just as I had always done. I reached for a pill that had rolled under the island, my vision blurring with hot, stinging tears. But as I reached, my phone, which I had placed on the floor beside me, lit up again with the email still open. I stopped. The tears evaporated. I was an appraiser. My entire career was built on the ability to spot the difference between a masterpiece and a forgery, to notice the microscopic details that everyone else missed. I didn't just look at the big picture. I looked at the brushstrokes. My eyes locked onto the fourth photo in the thread. It was a candid shot of Preston at a dinner table, looking serious as he signed a document. A bottle of Dom Perignon sat in an ice bucket next to him. To anyone else, it looked like a business dinner. But I saw the logo on the header of the document he was signing. It was a stylized griffin in navy blue ink. I froze. I knew that griffin. 3 years ago, Preston had been terrified of a lawsuit from a former business partner who claimed Preston had stolen intellectual property. To protect his assets, Preston had panicked. He had moved the ownership of his toys, the car collection, the Aspen house, the boat into a limited liability company called Vance Global Holdings. Because he wanted to distance himself completely from the assets to claim he had no control over them in court, he had made a decision that was purely arrogant. He had appointed me as the sole manager of the LLC. He had signed a durable power of attorney, granting me full legal authority to act on his behalf regarding all assets within that structure. He had told me it was just a formality. Just sign here, Caitlin. It keeps the lawyers off my back. The lawsuit had been settled out of court 6 months later. Preston had gone back to being the king of his domain. But here was the thing about Preston: he was brilliant at making money, but he was terrible at administrative details. He assumed that because he was the husband, the man, the breadwinner, that his word was law. He had never revoked the power of attorney. I stared at the Griffin logo on my phone screen. He was using Vance Global Holdings to funnel money for this affair. He was expensing his adultery through the very company he had put under my control. A cold, strange sensation washed over me. The shaking in my hands stopped completely. The nausea that had been roiling in my stomach settled into a hard, icy knot. I stood up, leaving the pills scattered on the floor. I walked over to the security panel on the wall near the refrigerator. I punched in the code and cycled through the camera feeds. Front gate, back patio, pool house. I tapped the button for the garage. Signal lost. He had disabled the interior garage cameras. He thought he was being clever. He thought that by turning off the cameras, I wouldn't see that he had taken the luggage set he claimed was too flashy for business trips. He thought he was erasing his tracks, but in doing so, he had confirmed everything. He was hiding. He was vulnerable. I walked to the window that overlooked the detached 6-car garage. It was a climate-controlled sanctuary, a temple of glass and steel where Preston kept his true loves, the McLaren P1, the Ferrari LaFerrari, the vintage Porsche. He spent more time polishing their fenders than he did talking to his son. They were worth $8 million, and according to the documents sitting in the safe in his office documents, he had forgotten about. Documents he thought I was too boring to understand. They didn't belong to him. They belonged to Vance Global Holdings. And I was Vance Global Holdings. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the expensive vase on the counter. I didn't rush upstairs to pack a bag and leave in a dramatic flurry. That was what the old Caitlin would have done. That was what a victim would do. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Olivia Sterling, a sharp voice answered on the second ring. Olivia had been my roommate in college before she became the most feared divorce attorney in Seattle. She billed $800 an hour, and she was worth every penny. "It's me," I said. My voice sounded unfamiliar to my own ears, flat, devoid of tremor, stripped of all emotion. "Caitlin?" Olivia's tone shifted instantly. "What's wrong?" "Is it Martha?" "Martha is fine," I said, my eyes fixed on the garage. "Preston is in Bali with a 24-year-old Instagram model named Serena." There was a brief silence on the other end. Then, the sound of a pen clicking. "I am so sorry. Kate, tell me what you need. Do you want me to serve him at the airport?" "No," I said. "Not yet. I want you to prepare the divorce filing. Irreconcilable differences, adultery. Use the scorched earth protocol we joked about over drinks 5 years ago, but do not file it yet." "Why?" Olivia asked. "Because he thinks he is the smartest man in the room," I replied. "He thinks I'm just a boring, old housewife who manages his mother's pills." I walked over to the wine fridge. Preston's wine fridge, filled with bottles that cost more than my first car. I pulled out a Chateau Margaux, a vintage he had been saving for his 40th birthday next month. "Caitlin, what are you going to do?" Olivia asked, her voice laced with warning and curiosity. "I have a power of attorney that dates back 3 years, I said, grabbing a corkscrew. "It gives me the right to liquidate assets for the benefit of the family estate, and I just discovered a very pressing financial need." "He never revoked it," Olivia gasped. "That idiot." "He forgot," I said. "He forgot because he doesn't respect me enough to fear me." The cork popped with a satisfying thud. I poured the dark red liquid into a glass, filling it to the brim. "I need 48 hours. Olivia, can you keep the paperwork quiet for 48 hours? If you have a valid POA, I can hold off the filing until Friday. That gives you 2 days. But Kate, be careful. If you liquidate, make sure it is airtight. Fair market value is a gray area. But I don't need fair market value," I interrupted. "I need speed. I need cash. And I need him to come home to a crater where his life used to be." "I'll have the papers ready," Olivia said. I could hear the smile in her voice. "Happy hunting." I hung up the phone. I took a long sip of the wine. It was rich, complex, and tasted like justice. I walked back to the window, staring out at the sleek silhouette of the garage against the gray Seattle sky. Inside that building sat the only things Preston Vance had ever truly loved. His ego, plated in carbon fiber and Italian leather. He had called me boring. He had called me old. He had dismissed me as a background character in the movie of his life. I swirled the wine in the glass, watching the red legs run down the side. "Enjoy the beach, Preston," I whispered to the empty kitchen. "I'll clean up for you while you are gone." The sun had barely crested the horizon over Lake Washington when I woke up, though I hadn't really slept. My mind had been running simulations all night, calculating liquidity ratios and exit strategies like the asset manager I was born to be. The first item on the agenda was Leo. My 10-year-old son was smart, far too perceptive for his own good, and I needed him out of the blast zone before I detonated his father's life. I found him in the breakfast nook, picking at a bowl of granola. He looked so much like Preston around the eyes that it made my chest ache. But he had my chin and, thank God, my empathy. "Pack your switch and your soccer gear," I said, pouring myself black coffee. My hand was steady. "I spoke to Mrs. Miller. You are spending the weekend with Toby. I decided to do a deep spring cleaning of the house while your dad is away. And the fumes from the industrial cleaners are going to be toxic." It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. The toxicity in this house wasn't chemical. It was financial and emotional. "Cool," Leo said, not looking up from his tablet. "Can we order pizza tonight?" "You can order whatever you want," I replied, kissing the top of his head. "I love you, Leo." "Love you too. Mom." The drop-off was quick. As soon as I watched Leo disappear into the Miller's front door, the mask of the doting mother dropped. and the face of the executioner emerged. I drove back to the estate in silence, the engine of my sensible SUV humming a low, steady rhythm. I had 48 hours. The clock was already ticking. Back in the driveway, I didn't go inside the house. I walked straight to the garage. I punched in the code, and the heavy door rolled up, revealing Preston's shrine. There they were, the McLaren P1 gleaming in volcano orange, the Ferrari LaFerrari, a sculptural masterpiece in Rosso Corsa, the Porsche 918 Spider, a vintage Aston Martin DB5 that he claimed made him feel like James Bond, though he lacked the charm and the loyalty of the character, and finally, the Ford GT. His latest acquisition, 5 cars. Roughly $8 million in fair market value. To Preston, these weren't just machines, they were his identity. He touched them more often than he touched me. He spoke about their specs with a passion he never showed for our son's grades or my career. They were the physical manifestation of his ego. And I was about to perform an amputation. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus. Marcus was a rival venture capitalist and a car collector who had been trying to buy the LaFerrari from Preston for 3 years. Preston had always laughed in his face, enjoying the power of saying no. Marcus hated my husband with a passion that bordered on obsession. "Caitlin Montclair," Marcus answered on the first ring, his voice dripping with surprised curiosity. "To what do I owe the honor? Preston usually doesn't let you near the phone when the big boys are talking." "Preston is unavailable," I said, my voice crisp and professional. "I am calling in my capacity as the manager of Vance Global Holdings." "Okay," Marcus said slowly, "and I am restructuring the family portfolio. We are moving away from depreciating assets and into more liquid positions. The entire collection is for sale." Silence stretched on the line for 5 seconds. I could practically hear him calculating. "The entire collection?" Marcus asked, his voice losing its mocking edge. "Even the P1. Everything, the P1, the LaFerrari, the Porsche, the Aston, and the GT. I want them gone today. Marcus." "Preston would never sell," Marcus said suspiciously. "He loves those cars more than his right arm." "Preston isn't the one managing the LLC right now," I replied. "I have a valid, durable power of attorney that grants me full authority to liquidate assets for the benefit of the estate. The paperwork is airtight. I can email it to your legal team right now." "Why the rush? Caitlin, is everything all right?" "The market is volatile," I lied smoothly, "and I prefer to strike while the iron is hot. Here's the deal. Marcus, I know what these cars are worth, but I don't have time for auctions or bidding wars. If you can wire the funds to a designated escrow account by noon and have your transport trucks here within 2 hours, I will give you the entire lot for 15% below market value." I heard him choke on his coffee. 15% on $8 million was a savings of over $1 million. It was the kind of deal that didn't exist in the real world unless someone was desperate or dangerous. 15%, Marcus repeated. "Cash wire today. And the trucks," I added firmly. "I want the garage empty by 2 o'clock. Can you do it? Or should I call the guys at Barrett Jackson?" "Don't you dare call them," Marcus shouted. "I will handle the wire myself. My transport team is already loading up. Send the banking details." I hung up and immediately forwarded the power of attorney and the wire instructions to his email. My heart was beating a little faster now, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the kill. While waiting for the wire confirmation, I walked back into the house and headed straight for Preston's home office. This was a room I was technically forbidden from entering, his sanctuary, he called it. It smelled of leather and the expensive cigars he smoked when he thought I wasn't around. I sat in his oversized leather chair. It felt too big. Ridiculous, even. I turned my attention to the wall safe hidden behind a generic landscape painting. Preston was a creature of habit and arrogance. He had insisted on a biometric safe because he thought keys were archaic when he installed it 5 years ago. He had programmed my fingerprint as a backup, joking that if he died in a plane crash, someone would need to get the insurance policies. He had never removed me. He simply assumed I would never dare to open it without his permission. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. A green light flashed, and the heavy steel door clicked open. Inside, I found stacks of cash, probably $50,000 in hundreds. But I wasn't interested in the petty cash. I reached for the documents in the back. There was a passport. I opened it. It was a second passport for Preston, issued by St. Kitts and Nevis. Citizenship by investment. He had a bolt hole. He had been planning an exit strategy long before he met Serena. Next to the passport was a small black ledger. I flipped through it. It was a list of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, with access codes. The balances were scribbled in the margins: 3 million, 2 million, 5 million. My anger, which had been a cold flame, suddenly roared into an inferno. He had millions stashed away while he scrutinized my grocery bills and complained about the cost of Leo's braces. I took photos of every page with my phone, ensuring the lighting was clear. Then I turned to his desktop computer. I guessed the password on the first try. Serena 2024. Of course, it was pathetic. I plugged in a terabyte external hard drive I had bought that morning. While the drive hummed to life, I opened his financial software. I didn't just want his money. I wanted his reputation. I wanted to know how a man who claimed his venture capital fund was struggling due to market headwinds could afford a $15,000 a night villa in Bali. It took me 10 minutes to find the smoking gun. It wasn't just his personal money he was spending. I found a series of transfers from the Vance Ventures Growth Fund client money. Investor money into a shell company called SV Consulting. I opened the folder for SV Consulting. The invoices were for consulting services, but the dates and amounts matched perfectly with charter jet flights, jewelry purchases, and 5-star hotel stays. He wasn't just an adulterer, he was an embezzler. He was stealing from his investors to fund his midlife crisis. "Got you," I whispered. I initiated a full system clone to the external drive. The progress bar crawled across the screen. Estimated time 45 minutes. While the computer worked, I made my second call. This one was to Elena Rostova, a real estate broker who specialized in discreet, high-end transactions for the sort of people who didn't want their names on Zillow. "Elena, it is Caitlin Montclair." "Caitlin, darling, how is the renovation coming along?" "The renovation is canceled," I said. "I am calling about the Aspen property, the chalet on Red Mountain." "Oh, the jewel box," Elena purred. "Is Preston finally ready to upgrade?" "We are selling," I said. "I have a power of attorney. I want a pocket listing." "Elena, no MLS, no signs. Call your 3 hungriest buyers who have been looking for a ski-in, ski out on the ridge. Tell them it is an as-is sale, fully furnished, immediate possession, price it to move." "How fast do you need this?" Elena asked, her tone shifting to professional urgency. "I want an offer on my desk by tomorrow morning." I said, "If you can get it done, I will give you a double commission." "Consider it done," Elena said. "I know a tech CEO from California who has been begging for a property on that street. I will call him now." The computer chimed. The transfer was complete. I ejected the drive and slipped it into my purse along with the passport and the ledger. I closed the safe, leaving the cash. Let him have his petty cash. It wouldn't get him far. My phone buzzed. A notification from the bank. Incoming wire transfer $6,800,000. Marcus didn't waste time. I walked out to the driveway just as the caravan of transport trucks rumbled through the front gates. They were massive, enclosed haulers, professional and efficient. A team of men in jumpsuits jumped out, led by a man with a clipboard. "Mrs. Montclair," he asked, "we are here for the collection." "The garage is open," I said, pointing. "Take them all." I stood on the front steps, arms crossed, watching the dissection of my husband's ego. First came the McLaren P1. The engine roared to life as the driver maneuvered it carefully onto the ramp. The orange paint seemed to burn in the sunlight. Preston had waited 2 years on a waitlist for that car. He had cried when it was delivered. Next was the LaFerrari, then the Aston Martin. One by one, they were swallowed into the dark bellies of the trucks. It was a surgical extraction. With every car that left the property, I felt a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. These weren't just cars. They were the symbols of his narcissism, the metal and rubber proof that he prioritized his image over his family. I had spent 10 years polishing his ego, managing his moods, and making myself smaller so he could feel big. I had organized his dinner parties, charmed his investors, and raised his son, all while he treated me like a line item in his budget. As the final truck ramp closed, sealing the Ford GT inside, I checked the bank balance on my phone again. The money was already being routed. I had set up a new trust account at a different bank that morning, one where Preston had no signatory power. By the time he landed, the funds would be shielded behind layers of legal firewall. The lead driver handed me a bill of lading. "All clear, ma'am. Pleasure doing business." "The pleasure was mine," I said, signing my name with a flourish. The trucks rumbled away, leaving only silence and oil stains on the pristine concrete of the garage floor. I looked at the empty space. It looked beautiful. It looked like freedom. I checked my watch. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Phase 1 was complete. I turned back to the house. I had an Aspen chalet to sell, and I needed to pack. But first, I walked back into the garage and swept the floor. I wanted it to be perfectly, insultingly clean when he returned. I wanted the emptiness to echo. The email notification from Elena popped up on my screen. "Buyer interested. Sending preliminary offer letter shortly." I smiled. Preston thought he was playing a game of checkers. He didn't realize I had just flipped the board and started playing three-dimensional chess. "Your move, darling," I said to the empty air. The Mercer Island estate was never really a home. It was a 12,000-square-foot resume. Every architectural detail, from the floating limestone staircase to the vaulted cedar ceilings, was designed to scream one specific message to the world. Preston Vance has arrived. But as I stood in the grand foyer, listening to the silence where my husband's ego used to echo, I realized the house was just like our marriage. It was beautiful from the street, expensive to maintain, and completely hollow on the inside. Technically, the deed to this mausoleum of modernism was held by the Montclair Vance Revocable Trust. When we purchased the property 6 years ago, Preston had insisted on the trust structure to shield the asset from potential litigation. He was terrified of being sued by a disgruntled founder or a jealous rival, but in his haste to protect himself from the world, he had handed me a loaded gun. I pulled up the trust documents on my tablet. Clause 14B, regarding asset liquidity and distress. It stated clearly that in the event of significant financial irregularity or urgent liquidity requirements, either trustee could unilaterally authorize the sale of real property to protect the remaining principal. Preston had thought this clause was for a market crash. I decided it was for a marriage crash. I opened the spreadsheet of his recent transactions, the ones I had downloaded from his secret ledger. The withdrawals in Bali were aggressive. $10,000 in cash here, $15,000 there, to an outsider, or specifically to a real estate attorney looking for a reason to sell. This looked like a man hemorrhaging money. It looked like a crisis. It looked like financial distress. I didn't just have a reason to sell. I had a fiduciary duty to stop the bleeding. I dialed the number for Julian Thorne. Julian was a 28-year-old artificial intelligence prodigy from Palo Alto who had recently cashed out his startup for $1 billion. He had been harassing real estate agents in Seattle for months, looking for a turnkey trophy property that was ready for immediate occupancy. He didn't want to decorate. He didn't want to renovate. He wanted to walk in, drop his bag, and post a photo on Instagram. "Caitlin Montclair," Julian answered, his voice breathless, probably mid-workout. "Elena said you might call. Is the rumors true? Is the Vance estate actually in play?" "It is," I said, keeping my voice cool and transactional. "But the situation is unique. Julian, we are restructuring our portfolio rapidly due to some overseas exposure. I am prepared to let the house go. But it has to be today, and it has to be an all-cash deal." "I have the cash," Julian said immediately. "I can wire $50 million right now if I like the place, but I need furniture. I need art. I don't have time to shop for couches. I looked around the living room, the Italian leather sectional that cost $40,000 and was too uncomfortable to sit on, the abstract sculpture in the corner that looked like a twisted bicycle wreck, the custom-made dining table that seated 20 people, though we rarely had dinner with just the three of us. That is actually perfect, I lied. We are selling it as is, fully furnished, the wine cellar, the home theater equipment, the gym, the art on the walls. You get everything. We are taking only our personal effects. Everything? Julian asked. Even the golf simulator. Especially the golf simulator, I said. Send me the contract, he said. I will sign via DocuSign within the hour. I will fly up tonight. It was almost too easy. Preston had spent years curating this collection of objects to prove his worth. And now, a boy in a hoodie was going to buy his entire life because he was too lazy to hire a decorator. I hung up and started the purge. I moved through the house like a ghost, armed with a roll of heavy-duty trash bags and a stack of packing crates. The rule was simple: if it sparked joy for Leo or me, it stayed. If it smelled like Preston's vanity, it was sold to Julian. I went to the master closet. Preston's side was a temple of narcissism, rows of bespoke suits from Savile Row, shoes that cost more than most people's mortgages. I left them all. Julian was roughly Preston's size. Maybe he would enjoy the hand-stitched lapels. Then I saw the golf clubs. They were leaning in the corner, a ridiculous set of gold-plated irons he had commissioned after his first big exit. He never played with them because the gold was too soft. So they sat there as a display piece, a monument to tackiness. I ran my hand over the cold metal. He loved these clubs. He showed them to every guest who entered the house. Sold, I whispered. I moved to the safe in the back of the closet, not the document safe, but the one where he kept his watches and cufflinks. It was unlocked, typical of his carelessness at home. I reached in to clear out a stack of cash he kept for emergencies, but my hand brushed against a small, velvet box tucked in the very back. It wasn't a watch box. It was a Tiffany blue jewelry box. My breath hitched. For a second, a foolish, pathetic part of me thought, maybe he bought this for me. Maybe he was planning a surprise for our anniversary before he left. I opened it. Inside nestled a diamond pendant, a solitaire that had to be at least 3 carats, suspended on a platinum chain. It was exquisite. It was also not my style. I preferred vintage pieces. Subtle gold. This was flashy. This was Serena. I lifted the velvet cushion to look for a receipt, but instead, I found a small, folded card. I opened it, and the handwriting. Preston's familiar. Jagged scrawl punched the air out of my lungs. For Serena, my muse, my escape, my one true love. My one true love. I stared at the words until they blurred. 15 years. I had given him 15 years of my life. I had supported him when he was a broke analyst. I had nursed his mother. I had raised his son. I had built his social standing brick by brick. And I was the dead weight. She was the one true love. The sadness that threatened to rise was instantly incinerated by a flash of white-hot rage. It was a clarifying heat. It burned away the last tendrils of guilt I might have felt about selling his house out from under him. I took the necklace out of the box. I held it up to the light. I was an appraiser. I knew stones. I pulled a jeweler's loop from my pocket. I always carried one, and inspected the diamond. I almost laughed out loud. It was real, technically, but the clarity was poor. An Si2 at best, with a visible inclusion right near the setting. And the color was off. A faint yellow hue that the platinum setting tried desperately to hide. It was a big stone, yes, but it was a cheap big stone. It was exactly like Preston, flashy on the surface, flawed at the core. I took a high-resolution photo of the necklace, focusing clearly on the inscription card. Then I opened a burner email account I had created years ago for market research. I composed a new message to Serena Love's Life. Subject: He is lying to you too, body darling. I found the gift he bought you. It is cute, but you should know. I had it appraised. It is a lab-grown stimulant, worth about $200. He calls you his one true love, but he buys you costume jewelry. Don't be an idiot. He is cheap. I attached the photo. Send. I didn't know if it was actually lab-grown. It was likely a low-grade natural diamond, but Serena wouldn't know the difference. And the seed of doubt was far more destructive than the truth. 10,000 miles away in Bali. It was currently mid-morning. Preston was likely sleeping off a hangover while Serena scrolled through her phone. I imagined the scene, the notification, the confusion, the rage. Narcissists like Serena didn't care about the marriage. They cared about their value. Being given a fake diamond would be an insult to her brand. I pocketed the necklace. I would sell it later and donate the money to a cat shelter. Preston hated cats. My phone pinged. It was the notification from DocuSign. Contract for sale of real property, 4,420 Shoreline Drive. Buyer, Julian Thorne. Seller, the Montclair Vance Revocable Trust. Caitlin Montclair. Trustee. I tapped the screen. I signed my name. I hit confirm. Just like that. We were homeless. I didn't feel panic. I felt a surge of adrenaline that made my fingertips tingle. 5 minutes later, another notification. The wire transfer had hit the new escrow account I had set up that morning, an account under a separate tax ID number for the trust. One that Preston didn't have online access to yet. $12 million. The house was sold. The cars were gone. Preston was effectively erased from Mercer Island. Mom. I turned. Leo was standing in the doorway of the closet, holding his Nintendo Switch case and a duffel bag. I had picked him up from Toby's house an hour ago, telling him we were going on a luxury staycation while the house was being fumigated. Are we leaving now? He asked, looking around the half-empty room. He didn't ask why I was holding a Tiffany box. He didn't ask why his father's clothes were still hanging there. He was a smart kid. He sensed the tectonic shift in our lives, even if he couldn't see the fault lines yet. Yes, baby, I said, putting the necklace in my pocket. We are leaving. Are we coming back? He asked quietly. I looked at the gold golf clubs. I looked at the suits. I looked at the bed, where I had spent thousands of nights wondering why I felt so lonely lying next to another person. No, I said. We are never coming back here. We walked out to the driveway. My SUV was packed with the few things that mattered: Leo's Lego sets, my grandmother's jewelry, our passports, and my laptop. I locked the front door for the last time. I left the key under the mat, just as I had instructed Julian. He would be here in 3 hours with his entourage. We drove across the floating bridge towards downtown Seattle. I had rented the penthouse suite at the Four Seasons Residences for the next month. It was ridiculously expensive, $30,000 a month, but I wasn't paying for it. Preston was, or rather, the Vance Global Holdings corporate credit card was. I figured he owed us a comfortable transition. As we merged onto the highway, my phone buzzed again. It wasn't an email this time. It was a notification from the security app on my phone, the one linked to the smart home system I had just sold. Front door unlocked, by user Julian Thorne. Julian was early, and then, a second later, a text from an unknown international number. Who is this? What are you talking about? Preston swore it was a VVS1. I smiled. The grenade had landed in Bali. Mom, why are you smiling? Leo asked from the back seat. I looked at him in the rearview mirror. I am just excited about our vacation. Leo, we are going to have a great view of the city. I turned my phone on silent. Let them fight. I had a penthouse to check into and a bottle of champagne to order. The house was gone. The cars were gone. And by the time Preston managed to calm Serena down and check his bank accounts, he would realize that the only thing he owned in Seattle was a wardrobe full of suits and a very expensive divorce lawyer bill. I drove into the city, leaving the empty shell of my former life behind in the rearview mirror, shrinking smaller and smaller until it was gone. I sat in the velvet armchair of the penthouse suite at the Four Seasons, a glass of sparkling water in my hand, my eyes fixed on the iPad screen propped up against a vase of fresh white lilies. The screen displayed a grainy but live feed from the front porch of the estate on Mercer Island. Technically, The house now belonged to Julian. But the ownership transfer on the security server took 24 hours to process. I had 24 hours of visibility. Preston was early. My anonymous email about the lab-grown diamond had worked faster than I anticipated. It had detonated his tropical paradise, sending shrapnel through his ego and his itinerary. He had caught the first flight out of Denpasar, likely leaving Serena screaming in the hotel lobby, and had flown 19 hours in a state of seething, hungover rage. I checked the time. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday. A black town car pulled into the driveway. Preston stepped out. He looked terrible. His linen shirt was wrinkled. His face was puffy from cabin pressure and alcohol, and his tan looked more like a sunburn. He didn't have his luggage. I assumed he had left it behind in his haste, or perhaps Serena had thrown it into the Indian Ocean. He marched up to the front door, the master of his domain returning to reclaim his throne. He punched his code into the smart lock. Beep, 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 buzz, red light. Access denied. I took a sip of water, watching the pixelated image of my husband frown. He tried again, stabbing the keypad with more force. Access denied. "Open the damn door," he shouted at the wood. I adjusted the volume on the iPad. His voice was tinny but clear. He kicked the base of the door, scuffing the expensive mahogany. Then he patted his pockets, searching for the physical key he hadn't carried since 2018. Realizing he was locked out of his own castle, he pulled out his phone. He called me first. My phone on the coffee table didn't even light up. I had blocked his number, his email, and his FaceTime 5 minutes after I signed the closing documents. He paced the porch, running a hand through his thinning hair. Then he made the call I had predicted. 45 minutes later, a locksmith van pulled up. A man in blue coveralls drilled through the lock of the custom-made entry door. It was a violent, noisy process. When the lock finally gave way, Preston shoved a wad of cash at the tradesman and stormed inside. I switched the camera feed to the interior wide-angle lens in the foyer. Preston stopped dead 3 feet inside the door. The silence of the house must have hit him first. A house full of furniture absorbs sound. An empty house amplifies it. The echo of his footsteps would have been sharp. Lonely. The foyer was bare. The antique console table where he tossed his keys. Gone. The massive mirror that he used to check his hair every morning outsold. He walked slowly into the living room. This was the moment I had curated for him. Julian, the buyer, had agreed to a delayed move-in date, but I had insisted on immediate vacancy to prepare the property. I had sold the high-end furniture to a staging company for pennies on the dollar just to clear the floor. Preston stood in the center of the vast living room. The afternoon sun streamed through the uncurtained windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. On the hardwood floor, where the massive Italian leather sectional used to sit, there was only a rectangle of pristine, lighter-colored wood surrounded by a faint outline of dust. It was a crime scene outline of his former life. He spun around, looking for something, anything familiar. The 75-inch television gone. The wet bar stripped of every crystal decanter and bottle of scotch. The art on the walls. Nothing but empty hooks and pale squares where the sun hadn't faded the paint. "Caitlin," his voice cracked. It echoed off the bare walls. "Leo." He ran up the floating staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. I switched feeds to the master bedroom. He burst in. The California king bed was gone. The walk-in closet was open, revealing empty racks. His suits, his shoes, his identity all gone. I had donated the suits to a charity that helps ex-convicts find jobs. I thought the irony was delicious. He stood in the center of the empty bedroom, breathing hard. Then, a thought seemed to strike him, a terrifying, visceral realization. He turned and sprinted back downstairs, nearly tripping on the landing. He bypassed the kitchen and headed straight for the side door. The garage. I switched to the garage feed. This was the only camera I had insured remained high definition. The heavy door was already open. The sunlight poured into the cavernous space, illuminating 6 empty parking bays. No McLaren, no Ferrari, no Porsche, no Aston Martin. Just oil stains on the epoxy floor and the smell of old rubber. Preston fell to his knees. It was a theatrical, desperate collapse. He crawled toward the spot where the LaFerrari used to sit, running his hands over the concrete as if he could conjure the car back into existence by sheer will. "No," he moaned. "No, no, no." He pulled his phone out again. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it twice. He didn't call me this time. He dialed 3 digits, 911. I sat back, waiting. The police response time on Mercer Island was excellent. 10 minutes later, 2 patrol cars rolled up the driveway. I recognized Officer Miller. He was the one who had responded when our alarm system tripped accidentally last Christmas. He was a good man. I watched Preston gesture frantically at the empty garage, his face purple with rage. He was shouting, pointing at the house, pointing at the empty bays. Officer Miller listened patiently, taking notes. Then he held up a hand to stop Preston's tirade. He walked back to his patrol car and picked up his radio. I knew exactly what was happening. He was running the plates. He was checking the property records. Officer Miller returned to Preston. His body language relaxed, almost bored. He said something that made Preston freeze. I couldn't hear the audio from the driveway clearly, but I knew the script. I had faxed the bill of sale and the power of attorney documents to the precinct captain that morning, along with a courtesy note explaining that a civil dispute might result in a false report. Officer Miller reached into his clipboard and pulled out a photocopy. He handed it to Preston. Preston stared at the paper. It was the power of attorney he had signed 3 years ago, the one with his signature in bold blue ink. He crumpled the paper in his fist and threw it on the ground. He screamed something that looked like, "She can't do this." Officer Miller shook his head, pointing a stern finger at Preston. "Civil matter," he was saying. "No crime committed. The cars were sold legally by the authorized agent. Good day, sir." The police got back in their cars and drove away. Preston was left standing alone in the driveway of a house he no longer owned, staring at a garage that no longer held his treasures. He stormed back into the empty house, likely looking for a drink, but there was no alcohol. He slammed his fist against the kitchen island, the only piece of furniture too heavy to move. He needed money. He needed a lawyer. He needed to fix this. He pulled out his wallet and grabbed his sleek black Centurion card, the corporate card for Vance Ventures. He dialed the number on the back, putting it on speakerphone as he paced the empty kitchen. "This is the concierge desk," a polite female voice answered. "This is Preston Vance," he barked. "My card isn't working. I tried to book a hotel and it was declined. Fix it. Now." "One moment. Mr. Vance," the voice said. "Let me check the security status." There was a pause. 30 seconds of hold music that must have sounded like a funeral dirge to him. "Mr. Vance," the voice returned, cooler this time. "I see a security flag on this account placed by the chief financial officer regarding suspicious foreign activity." "I am the CEO," Preston shouted. "I authorize the charges." "I understand, sir," the operator said. "However, the flag notes specifically mention embezzlement of funds for personal use in Indonesia. The account has been frozen pending an internal audit. You will need to speak with your legal department." "Who flagged it?" Preston whispered, his face draining of color. "Who put the flag on?" "The report was submitted anonymously via the whistleblower hotline, sir, but backed by digital receipts submitted to the board." Preston ended the call. His hand went limp. The phone clattered to the countertop. He knew. He finally knew. I had him. I had him on the cars. I had him on the house. And I had him on the company. I picked up my phone. It was time. I typed a single message. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Olivia Sterling's office. Don't be late. I hit send. On the screen, I saw Preston check his phone. He read the message. He looked up, staring directly into the security camera lens in the corner of the kitchen ceiling. His eyes were wild, red-rimmed, and filled with a mixture of hatred and fear I had never seen before. He raised his middle finger at the camera. I toasted the screen with my sparkling water. Classy to the end. Preston, he had nowhere to go. He couldn't stay here. The water and electricity were scheduled to be shut off in 2 hours. Julian had requested a hard reset of the utilities. He couldn't go to a hotel. His cards were frozen. He couldn't go to his mother. She was in a convalescent home I had paid for with his money. He had to leave. He walked out the front door, slamming it behind him. He stood on the curb, looking left and right. His town car had left hours ago. He opened his rideshare app. I could imagine the struggle. His corporate account was linked to the frozen card. He would have to use his personal debit card. The one linked to the joint checking account I had drained down to $500. 10 minutes later, a dented Toyota Camry with a cracked bumper pulled up. It was an Uber X, the lowest tier. Preston Vance, the venture capital king of Seattle, squeezed his 6'2" frame into the back seat of a compact sedan that smelled of pine air freshener and stale cigarettes. As the car pulled away, my phone buzzed again. It wasn't Preston. It was a voicemail notification from an international number. Serena. I pressed play. You witch? Her voice was shrill, breaking with hysteria. You canceled the cards. The hotel won't let me leave. They took my passport. Preston isn't answering. You can't do this to me. I am a victim here. I didn't know. She was crying now. Ugly, gasping sobs. Please, she begged, her voice dropping to a whisper. The bill is $40,000. They said they are going to call the Indonesian police. Please, Caitlin, help me. I deleted the voicemail. The sun was setting over Elliott Bay, turning the sky a bruised purple. I stood up and walked to the window of the penthouse. The city lights were flickering on. 1,000,000 tiny diamonds that were actually real. I had stripped him of his shelter, his transport, his money, and his mistress. He was naked. Tomorrow, at 9 o'clock, I would skin him. Olivia Sterling's office was designed to intimidate. It was a glass box suspended 40 floors above downtown Seattle, offering a panoramic view of the rain-slicked city that looked small and insignificant from this height. The conference table was a slab of polished black granite that felt cold to the touch. I sat on one side, my back to the window, wearing a navy blue blazer and white silk blouse. I wore no jewelry except for a simple pair of pearl studs. I had scrubbed my face clean of the heavy contouring Preston preferred. I wanted him to see me, the real me, the woman who was about to dismantle his life with the precision of a surgeon. The digital clock on the wall read 9 o'clock exactly. The heavy glass doors flew open. Preston didn't walk in. He stormed in. The 24 hours since he had stood in the empty driveway of our former home had not been kind to him. He was wearing the same wrinkled linen shirt, now stained with sweat and travel grime. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles that spoke of a sleepless night spent in a cheap motel or the back of a rental car. He smelled of stale bourbon and desperate fury. "You thief," he hissed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You absolute, vindictive thief." He slammed his hands down on the granite table, leaning over to loom over me. It was a posture that had worked for 15 years. It was designed to make me shrink, to make me apologize. I didn't blink. I took a slow sip of the sparkling water Olivia's assistant had poured. "Good morning, Preston," I said. "Please, take a seat. You look exhausted." "I am not sitting down," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I am going to have you arrested. I just left the police station. I am pressing charges for grand larceny, fraud, and theft of property. You sold my cars. You sold my house. That is prison time. Caitlin, that is 10 years in a federal cell." He turned to Olivia, who was sitting at the head of the table, looking bored. "And you? You are going to be disbarred for facilitating this. I have already called my legal team. They are drafting the complaint right now." Olivia adjusted her glasses. She didn't look up from the file in front of her. "Actually, Preston, your legal team is likely advising you to shut up and sit down, which is why they aren't here yet. But since you are here, let us review the facts." She slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a photocopy of the durable power of attorney document. 3 years ago, You signed this document granting Caitlin full, unilateral authority to manage, sell, or liquidate any assets held by the Montclair Vance Revocable Trust and Vance Global Holdings, LLC, Olivia said, her voice crisp. The language is explicit. Clause 7. Section C. The agent may act to prevent financial insolvency or to restructure assets as deemed necessary for the benefit of the estate. There was no insolvency. Preston spat. I am worth $40 million. Were, I corrected softly. The liquidity crisis was manufactured, he argued, finally pulling out a chair and collapsing into it. She made it up. On the contrary, Olivia continued, sliding a second document across. It was a spreadsheet highlighting his cash withdrawals in Bali and the transfers to Serena. Caitlin identified a pattern of erratic, high-volume cash hemorrhaging that suggested a mental health crisis or a blackmail situation. As your fiduciary, she acted rapidly to convert illiquid assets, the cars and the house, into cash to protect the principal. The money is sitting safely in a trust account. Not a penny has been stolen. It has simply been reallocated. Preston stared at the spreadsheet. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. He knew the law. He knew he had signed that power of attorney to hide assets from a lawsuit, and now that same shield was being used to bludgeon him. You can't sell the house, he whispered. The deed. The deed was transferred yesterday, I said. Julian Thorne is the new owner. He is very happy with the golf simulator. Preston looked at me then. Really looked at me. The hatred in his eyes was pure, unadulterated poison. I will sue you until you are living in a cardboard box. I will drag this out for a decade. You won't see a dime of that money. I will freeze it all. You could try, I said, but that brings us to the second part of our meeting. I reached into my leather portfolio. I didn't pull out a lawyer's brief. I pulled out a stack of high-resolution, 8x10 glossy photographs. I fanned them out on the black granite table like a winning poker hand. The first photo was the selfie of him and Serena in the pool. The second was the hotel invoice. The third was a close-up of him signing the bill for a $20,000 diamond necklace. Preston laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Is this an adultery? This is a no-fault state. Caitlin, the judge won't care who I sleep with. Infidelity doesn't affect the division of assets in Washington unless you can prove I wasted marital funds. And 20 grand on a necklace is a drop in the bucket. I will pay you back half. Big deal. He leaned back, crossing his arms. He thought he had won. He thought I was just a scorned wife playing the emotional card. You are right, I said. The judge might not care about Serena, but do you know who will care? I slid the final photograph across the table. It wasn't a picture of him and Serena. It was a screenshot of the internal accounting ledger for Vance Ventures, specifically the SV Consulting folder I had cloned from his hard drive. It showed dates, wire transfers, and the corresponding consulting invoices that matched perfectly with his luxury vacations, his jewelry purchases, and his private jet charters. Preston's face went the color of ash. That is proprietary company data, he choked out. You hacked my computer. That is illegal. I didn't hack anything, I said calmly. The laptop was in our home, in an unlocked room, and the password was my birthday until you changed it to your mistress's name. I simply accessed family records, and what I found, Preston, is fascinating. I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the table. You aren't just spending your own money. You are spending your investors' money. That is the Vance Ventures Growth Fund 3 you are dipping into. That is pension fund money. That is institutional capital. I saw the sweat bead on his forehead. Section 404 of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, Olivia interjected helpfully. Misappropriation of funds, wire fraud, embezzlement. The Securities and Exchange Commission takes a very dim view of fund managers using client capital to buy lab-grown diamonds for Instagram models. It was a loan, Preston stammered. I was going to pay it back. It is an internal accounting error. It is a felony, I said, and it carries a prison sentence of up to 20 years. The room fell silent. The hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Preston looked from the photos to me, then to Olivia, then back to the photos. He was calculating the odds, running the risk assessment models he was so famous for. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was a rasp. "I want a divorce," I said. "An uncontested, clean divorce. I want 70% of the liquid assets currently held in the escrow account. I want full legal and physical custody of Leo, with supervised visitation for you until you complete a psychiatric evaluation, and I want you to sign the agreement today." 70%, Preston exploded. "That is robbery. The standard is 50-50. The standard applies to husbands who aren't embezzling millions from their partners," I countered. "Here is your choice. Preston, option A. You sign the papers, we walk away, you keep your 30%, which is still millions, you keep your freedom, you can try to put your company back together before anyone finds out." I paused, letting the silence stretch. Option B. I walk out of here and go directly to the SEC regional office. I hand them this file. Then I send a copy to the board of directors of Vance Ventures. You will be fired by lunch, you will be indicted by dinner, and you will spend the next 15 years in a federal prison wearing an orange jumpsuit that matches your McLaren. Preston was breathing hard, his chest heaving. "You wouldn't," he sneered. "You love the lifestyle too much. If you destroy me, you destroy the golden goose. You won't get any alimony if I am in jail." "I don't need alimony," I said. "I have the cash from the cars and the house. I am fine." "You are bluffing," he said, trying to summon his old arrogance. "You are weak, Caitlin. You always have been. You are too soft to pull the trigger. You are just a boring housewife who—" I pulled my iPad from my bag. I tapped the screen. The audio recording from the house played at maximum volume. His voice, clear and cruel, filled the room. "She is too boring and old to figure out how to track me. I need someone who matches my energy, not a dead weight." I stopped the recording. I looked him dead in the eye. "I am not boring, Preston. I am efficient, and I am not dead weight. I am the anchor that stopped you from drifting into prison years ago, but now I am cutting the line." He stared at me. He looked small. The titan of industry, the king of Mercer Island, was just a scared man in a dirty shirt. But then, the survival instinct kicked in. The arrogance that was hardwired into his DNA resurfaced. He stood up, smoothing his wrinkled shirt. He picked up the photos of the embezzlement and ripped them in half. "I am not signing anything," he said, his voice trembling with false bravado. "You think these copies scare me? My lawyers will bury this. I have the best defense team in the state, Balthazar and Associates. They charge $1,000 an hour, and they will tear your little power of attorney to shreds. They will prove you accessed this data illegally. They will prove you were emotionally unstable." He pointed a finger at me. "You overplayed your hand. Caitlin, you should have taken 50%. Now you are going to get nothing." He turned to the door. "I will see you in court." "Preston," I called out as he reached the handle. He stopped, looking back with a sneer. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded letter. It wasn't a legal document. It was a bank notice I had retrieved from our mailbox that morning. "You might want this," I said, sliding it down the long table. "It is a demand letter from Chase. Your personal checking account is overdrawn by $4,000. Apparently, the Uber ride here triggered the overdraft." I stood up, smoothing my skirt. "Since you froze the corporate cards, and I emptied the joint accounts, and you have no cash, how exactly are you planning to pay Balthazar and Associates $1,000 an hour?" Preston looked at the letter. He looked at me. For a second, I saw genuine terror in his eyes. "I will find a way," he muttered. "I always win." He slammed the door behind him. I sat back down. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer release of adrenaline. "He is going to fight," Olivia said, closing the file. "He is a narcissist. He can't accept a loss." "I know," I said. He thinks he can charm his way out of it. He thinks he can find money. Can he? No, I said. I flagged his credit report for identity theft this morning. No bank will lend him a dime for at least 30 days while they investigate. He is toxic. So now what? Olivia asked. We wait for him to implode. No, I said, standing up and walking to the window to look down at the city. Somewhere down there, Preston was standing on a sidewalk, penniless and furious. Now we take away his last shield. We take away his reputation. I turned back to Olivia. Prepare the press release for the charity auction. And Olivia, yes. Make sure you invite the wives of all his board members. I picked up my purse. The war had officially begun. And unlike Preston, I had ammunition. Seattle is a city built on polite surfaces. The rain washes away the grit, leaving behind a gleaming facade of glass towers and passive-aggressive smiles. In the upper echelons of society, reputation is a currency more valuable than Bitcoin, and Preston Vance was currently spending his last reserves trying to bankrupt mine. Within hours of leaving Olivia's office, the whispers began. Preston, desperate and cornered, had hit the phones. He didn't have money for lawyers yet, but he had contacts. He called country club presidents, board members, and the gossips who ran the charity circuit. His narrative was consistent and vicious. Caitlin Montclair had suffered a psychotic break. She was hysterical, paranoid, and looting the family estate in a fit of manic jealousy. He painted himself as the long-suffering husband trying to manage a volatile wife. It is tragic, really, I heard a frenemy recount later. He says she sold the cars because she thought they were possessed. I didn't issue a denial. I didn't post a rant on Facebook. I did something far more dangerous. I threw a party. Using $100,000 from the car sale proceeds classified as charitable allocation, I organized a last-minute gala at the Seattle Art Museum. The theme was New Beginnings, benefiting a shelter for abandoned women and children. It was the kind of high-road maneuver that was impossible to criticize without looking like a monster. The event was packed. The curiosity factor was off the charts. Everyone wanted to see the crazy woman. I wore a white structural gown that looked like armor made of silk. I stood at the entrance, greeting the wives of Preston's biggest investors. I didn't look crazy. I looked radiant. "Caitlin, darling," whispered Mrs. Abernathy, whose husband sat on the board of Vance Ventures. "We were so worried. Preston said you were unwell." I smiled, a soft, sad expression that practiced perfectly in the mirror. "Oh, you know Preston. He has always been dramatic under pressure. The truth is, we are separating. It is difficult, of course, being a single mother now. But I am focusing on stability for Leo, and giving back seems like the only right thing to do with our surplus." I let the word surplus hang in the air. It implied wealth, control, and generosity. It did not imply a woman who thought cars were possessed. Midway through the evening, the air in the room shifted. A murmur rippled through the crowd near the grand staircase. Heads turned. Phones were raised. I looked up. Standing at the top of the stairs was Serena. She had made it back from Bali, likely on a loan from a gullible friend. She wasn't wearing a gala gown. She was wearing a tight red dress that looked more appropriate for a Las Vegas nightclub. She held her phone up, the ring light blindingly bright. She was live streaming. "There she is," Serena screamed, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "The thief. The woman who stole my boyfriend's money and left me stranded in Indonesia." The room fell silent. The string quartet stopped playing. Serena marched down the stairs. The camera focused on me. "Say hello to your followers, Caitlin. Tell them how you ruined Preston's life. You are just a bitter, old hag who can't stand that he loves me." Security started to move in, but I held up a hand. "Let her speak. Let the world see." "You took everything," Serena shrieked, thrusting the phone into my face. "You sold his cars. You sold his house. You are evil." The livestream comments were flying up the screen. I glanced at the lens. I didn't recoil. I didn't shout back. I stepped forward, into the light. my expression one of pity, not anger. "Hello, Serena," I said, my voice calm and amplified by the museum acoustics. "I am glad you made it back safely. It must have been terrifying to be alone in a foreign country when the credit card stopped working." "You canceled them," she yelled. "I didn't cancel anything," I said gently. "The bank froze them because the funds were being used inappropriately by a married man using company money." I looked directly into the camera lens. "You are not the villain here, Serena," I said, my voice dropping to a compassionate register. "You are just 24. You believed him when he said he was leaving me. You believed him when he said the money was his. You are a victim of his promises. Just like I was for 15 years. He lied to both of us, honey. He told you I was crazy. He told me he was working. The only difference is, I stopped believing him." Serena blinked. Her mouth opened. But no words came out. The narrative had flipped. I hadn't attacked her. I had absolved her. I had turned her from a homewrecker into a naive girl duped by a predator. "Go home, Serena," I said softly. "This isn't your fight. It is his." Security gently escorted a confused and silent Serena out of the building. The room erupted, not in scandal, but in applause. Mrs. Abernathy was the first to clap. By the time the gala ended, the hashtag Team Caitlin was trending on Twitter in Seattle. The video of my confrontation had gone viral, garnering 2 million views in 3 hours. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. "Class act. She destroyed him with kindness. Preston Vance is a clown." The social court had reached a verdict. Preston wasn't a victim. He was a liability. The fallout in the business world was immediate. The next morning, while I was making pancakes for Leo in our penthouse kitchen, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Vance Ventures, CEO, suspended pending internal audit. The article cited concerns regarding executive conduct and irregularities in fund management. The board of directors, terrified of the bad PR from the viral video and the whispers of embezzlement I had planted with Mrs. Abernathy, had acted fast. They couldn't have a CEO who was trending on TikTok for cheating on his wife and getting his mistress stranded in Bali. Preston was out. His salary was frozen. His stock options were locked. I didn't celebrate. I poured syrup on Leo's pancakes. "Mom," Leo said, poking at his breakfast. "Kyle at school. He showed me a video of Dad's friend yelling at you." My heart stopped. I had tried to shield him, but in the age of smartphones, protection is an illusion. I sat down next to him. I turned off the stove. "I am sorry you saw that. Leo," I said, Is Dad a bad guy?" he asked, his voice small. "Kyle said Dad stole money." This was the hardest part. Destroying Preston was easy. Explaining the wreckage to his son was impossible. "Your dad," I chose my words carefully, "made some very bad choices. He broke promises he made to me, and he broke rules at his job. When adults do that, there are consequences. People get angry. People get hurt." "Like you?" Leo asked. "Yes, like me," I admitted. "But that doesn't mean he's a monster. Leo, he loves you. He is just lost right now, and he isn't going to be living with us anymore because I need to keep our home safe and happy. Does that make sense?" Leo nodded slowly. "I guess. But Mom?" "Yeah. You looked really cool in the video. You didn't even yell." I hugged him, burying my face in his hair so he wouldn't see the tears. "Yelling doesn't fix things, buddy. Being smart fixes things." Later that afternoon, I drove to the courthouse. I wasn't done. Preston was down, but he wasn't out. He would try to access the offshore accounts, the ones in the Cayman Islands that I had photographed. He would try to liquidate the remaining assets hidden in shell companies to pay for his defense. I met Olivia in the judge's chambers. We presented the evidence of flight risk, the second passport, the Bali trip, the attempted asset dissipation. We presented the viral video as proof of the public chaos surrounding the respondent. "Your Honor," Olivia argued. Mr. Vance has demonstrated a clear intent to flee and to waste marital assets. We request an immediate, emergency freeze on all accounts, domestic and international, including the entities listed in this addendum. The judge, a stern woman who had likely seen the viral video herself over morning coffee, signed the order without hesitation. Temporary restraining order on assets. Writ of attachment. It was a financial straitjacket. As I walked out of the courthouse, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I knew who it was. You win, Preston's voice said. He sounded drunk. You took my job. You took my reputation. You turned the whole city against me. Are you happy? I am not happy. Preston, I said, walking to my car. I am busy. I have a son to raise and a future to build. You should try doing the same. I have nothing left, he shouted. I can't even buy a sandwich. My cards are declined. My friends won't take my calls. You have your freedom, I said coldly. For now, I suggest you use it to find a public defender. Balthazar and Associates don't work for free. I hung up. The sky was clear. A rare blue day in Seattle. I took a deep breath. The air tasted clean. He thought this was the bottom. He thought he had lost everything. But he was wrong. He still had secrets, and I was just starting to dig. The divorce proceedings had shifted from a sprint to a marathon, a grueling slog through mountains of financial paperwork. I spent my days in the study of the penthouse suite, surrounded by boxes of printed bank statements and tax returns. The view of the Space Needle outside was breathtaking, but the landscape of my husband's finances was a disaster zone. I was reconciling the joint retirement accounts, the ones we were supposed to split 50-50. When I found the hole, it was a void where $2 million should have been. According to the statement from Vanguard, a wire transfer had been initiated 6 months ago from our joint IRA to an entity listed as Pacific Rim Holdings. The authorization signature at the bottom of the request form was mine. It was a loop-de-loop scrawl that looked vaguely like my handwriting, but I knew with absolute certainty that I had not signed it. I had been in the hospital that week with Leo, who was having his tonsils removed. I hadn't signed anything except a consent form for anesthesia. $2 million. Stolen, forged, gone. I didn't call Olivia. This was beyond divorce law. This was criminal forensic territory. I called Sam, an old friend from university who had spent 10 years with the Treasury Department before going private as a forensic accountant. He was the kind of man who looked at spreadsheets and saw blood trails. Sam came over within the hour. He sat at my dining table, drinking black coffee, his eyes darting across the screens of his dual-monitor laptop. He had been quiet for 40 minutes, which terrified me. Sam was usually chatty. Silence meant he had found something ugly. "Caitlin," he said finally, taking off his glasses, "you thought Preston was just embezzling from his company to pay for his girlfriend, right?" "That is what the records showed," I said. "The SV consulting invoices. Those were the sloppy ones," Sam said. "The amateur hour stuff. But this $2 million, this didn't go to Serena, and it didn't go to a simple offshore account. It went into a wash cycle." What?" "Money laundering," Sam said, his voice low. "I traced the routing number for Pacific Rim Holdings. It bounces through a shell company in Nevis, then another in Macau, and finally lands in a digital wallet associated with an unregulated online gambling syndicate operating out of Eastern Europe. They call it Dark Horse Gaming. It is illegal in the United States." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Preston is gambling." "No," Sam said grimly. "Preston is the laundromat. He is taking dirty money from the syndicate, mixing it with legitimate investor capital in his venture fund to make it look clean, and then cycling it back out to them minus his commission. The $2 million he stole from your retirement, that was likely shortfall money. He probably owed them a payment and didn't have the liquidity, so he raided your savings to cover his tracks. My husband wasn't just a cheater. He wasn't just a thief. He was a mule for organized crime." "If the feds find this," Sam said, closing his laptop, "they don't just arrest him. They seize everything. The house, the cars, The accounts, even the clean money. It is called civil asset forfeiture. If you are still married to him when the hammer drops, you are an accessory by proximity. The hammer isn't dropping on me, I said. My voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I need proof, hard proof. You need the ledger, Sam said. Guys like this always keep a shadow ledger, the real numbers, the names, the payouts. I remembered the external hard drive, the one I had cloned from Preston's computer in the home office. I had decrypted his emails. But there was one folder labeled System Config that had been heavily encrypted. I had assumed it was just boring software files. I might have it, I whispered, before I could plug in the drive. The intercom buzzed. The concierge's voice was tight with anxiety. Mrs. Montclair, Mr. Vance is here. He says he has a right to see his son. He is causing a scene in the lobby. My stomach dropped. Leo is in his room, I told Sam. Stay here. Do not let Leo come out. Send him up, I told the concierge. But call security to stand by the elevator. Preston arrived 3 minutes later. He looked worse than he had at the law firm. He had lost weight. His suit hung loosely on his frame, and there was a manic, desperate energy vibrating off him. He didn't knock. He pounded on the door until I opened it. Where is he? Preston demanded, pushing past me into the foyer. Where is my son? He is doing homework, I said. Standing my ground, I had activated the camera on my phone, propped discreetly on the console table, recording everything. You are not taking him. Preston, the judge granted a restraining order on the assets, and we are filing for emergency custody tomorrow. You are trying to steal my boy like you stole my cars, he screamed, spinning on me. His face was purple. I know you have people digging into the accounts. Caitlin, I got an alert from the bank in Nevis. Stop it. You are playing with fire. You have no idea who you are dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, I said calmly. I am dealing with a man who stole $2 million from his wife's retirement fund to pay off a gambling syndicate. Preston froze. The color vanished from his face, leaving him a sickly gray. You don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. Pacific Rim Holdings, I said. Dark Horse Gaming. Does that ring a bell? Preston took a step toward me. His hands were balled into fists. For the first time in 15 years, I felt a genuine physical threat. This wasn't just anger. This was the cornered rat desperation of a man who knew he was looking at prison time or a concrete shoes scenario. You shut your mouth, he hissed, looming over me. You stop the audit. You give me half the money from the house sale. And you sign over custody of Leo so I can leave the country with him. I need leverage. Caitlin, if I have the kid, the courts won't touch me. You want to use our son as a human shield? I asked, disgust roiling in my gut. I will do what I have to do. He raised his hand, his eyes wild. I will not let you ruin me. I didn't flinch. I stared him down. Hit me. Preston, do it. It will make the police report so much easier to write. His hand hovered in the air, trembling. Dad. The voice was small and terrified. Preston lowered his hand instantly, spinning around. Leo was standing in the hallway leading to the bedrooms. He was holding his Nintendo Switch, his eyes wide with fear. He had heard the shouting. He had seen his father raise a hand to his mother. Leo, Preston said, his voice shifting instantly to a sickly sweet tone. Buddy, come here. Dad is here to take you for ice cream. We are going to go on a trip. Leo didn't move. He took a step back. Mom said you sold the cars, Leo said, his voice trembling. Why did you sell the Ferrari? Dad, where did they go? It was an innocent question. I hadn't told Leo the details of the liquidation. I had simply said we were downsizing, but in Preston's paranoid narcotic mind, it was an accusation. He thought I had poisoned the well. Shut up, Preston screamed at the 10-year-old boy. Stop asking about the damn cars. Your mother is a liar. She stole them. She stole everything. You are just like her. Aren't you ungrateful little brat? The silence that followed was deafening. Leo's face crumbled. He didn't cry immediately. He just looked at his father as if seeing a monster for the first time. The hero worship, the love, the trust, it all evaporated in that single moment of verbal violence. "I hate you," Leo whispered. Then he turned and ran back into his room, slamming the door. The sound of the slamming door seemed to snap Preston out of his rage. He looked at the hallway, then at his own hands. He realized, too late, what he had done. He had lost the only thing he had left that was pure. "Get out," I said. My voice was ice. "Get out before I call the police and show them the video of you threatening me." Preston looked at me, defeat slumping his shoulders. "Caitlin, Get out." He left. The door clicked shut, and I locked the deadbolt. I leaned against the wood for a moment. Listening to my own heart hammer against my ribs, I went to check on Leo. Sam was already there, sitting on the floor outside the door, talking quietly to him. I nodded to Sam, thanked him with my eyes, and went back to the study. I had work to do. I plugged the cloned hard drive into my laptop. I pulled up the encrypted system config folder. I didn't need a password cracker. I knew Preston. He was arrogant, but he was sentimental about his cheating. I typed in the date he met Serena, August 12, 2023. Access denied. I tried the date he opened the first offshore account. Access denied. I sat back, thinking, what was the one thing he cared about most? The one thing he would never forget. I typed in the VIN number of the McLaren P1. I had memorized it from the insurance forms. Access granted. The folder opened. It wasn't system files. It was a spreadsheet. A massive, detailed, horrifying spreadsheet. It was the Black Ledger. It listed everything. Every dollar washed. Every kickback paid to the Greek. Every bribe paid to a local zoning official for his construction projects. Every penny stolen from the teacher's pension fund that invested in Vance Ventures. This was the smoking gun. This was the nuclear football. My phone rang. It was Marcus, the rival VC who had bought the cars. "Caitlin," Marcus said, his voice low. "I heard a rumor. Word on the street is that Preston is radioactive, and word is also that you have his hard drive." "News travels fast," I said. "I will give you $5 million for that drive," Marcus said. "Cash, no questions asked. I can use it to bury him and take over his remaining portfolio. I will crush him. Caitlin, I will do your dirty work for you." $5 million. It was a lot of money. It would secure Leo's future forever. And Marcus would certainly destroy Preston. But Marcus was dirty too. If I sold him the drive, I was just trading one monster for another. I was participating in the blackmail economy. "No," I said. $10 million, Marcus countered. "Don't be stupid. Caitlin, this is business." "It is not business," I said. "It is justice, and justice isn't for sale." I hung up. I took a screenshot of a single page of the ledger, the page showing the transfer of my $2 million into the gambling syndicate's account. I opened a secure email. I attached the screenshot to P. vanceventures.com. Subject checkmate, Preston. I found the ledger. The McLaren FIVIN was a cute password. "Here is the deal. You have 1 hour. 1. Sign the full custody agreement. You give up all parental rights. You get supervised visitation only if Leo asks for it, which he won't. 2. Sign the uncontested divorce decree giving me 100% of the remaining marital assets to repay the stolen retirement funds. 3. Resign from your company. If I don't have the signed documents in my inbox by 6 o'clock, this entire drive goes to the FBI Cybercrimes Division. I am not negotiating. I am not bluffing. And I am done protecting you. Tick-tock, Caitlin." I hit send. I watched the second hand on the clock tick. At 5:58, my email pinged. It was a DocuSign notification. Document signed by Preston Vance. He had folded. He knew I held the power to send him to federal prison for 20 years. He chose freedom and poverty over a cage. I printed the documents. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. Not of sadness, but of relief. The nightmare was over. I had saved my son. I had saved my future, but as I looked at the hard drive sitting on my desk, I knew I had one more decision to make. Preston had signed the deal. He thought he was safe, but he had stolen $2 million from me. He had threatened me. He had screamed at our son. I picked up the hard drive. I wasn't going to sell it to Marcus, but I remembered what Sam had said. If you are still married to him when the hammer drops. The divorce papers were signed. I was no longer married to him. I was free. I put the hard drive in a padded envelope. I addressed it to the FBI field office in Seattle. Anonymously. I wasn't going to blackmail him. I wasn't going to save him. I was going to let the consequences of his own actions find him. Preston Vance had forgotten the first rule of business: always pay your debts, and his debt to society was just about to come due. Preston Vance was a man who viewed contracts as suggestions and handshakes as opportunities for betrayal. I knew that even though he had signed the custody agreement and the asset surrender forms electronically, his paranoia would not let him rest. He believed that everyone operated with the same lack of morality that he did. He assumed that even after getting what I wanted, I would still destroy him. He was right, of course, but not in the way he thought. I wasn't going to send the hard drive to the FBI because I broke a deal. I was going to send it because men like Preston never stop escalating until they are stopped by force. The escalation happened exactly 18 hours after he signed the papers. It was 2:00 in the afternoon on a rainy Tuesday. I was at the penthouse, finalizing the forensic timeline for the file I was preparing to mail anonymously to the federal building. My phone rang. It was the headmaster of St. Jude's Academy, the private school Leo had attended since kindergarten. "Mrs. Montclair?" Headmaster Collins said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "We have a situation at the North Gate. Mr. Vance is here. He is demanding to take Leo. He claims there is a family emergency." My blood turned to ice. But my pulse didn't jump. I had anticipated this. In fact, I had budgeted for it. "Is he with Leo now?" I asked. "No," Collins said. "Mr. Henderson intercepted him." Mr. Henderson was 6 feet and 5 inches of former Navy SEAL, whom I had hired 3 days ago using a fraction of the proceeds from the sale of the Ferrari LaFerrari. I had given him one specific instruction: if Preston Vance comes within 50 feet of my son, stop him. Physically. "I am on my way," I said. "Call the police. Tell them there is a violation of an emergency protective order in progress." I grabbed my keys and ran. By the time I arrived at the school, the scene was chaotic. Parents were gathering in hushed clusters near their Range Rovers, whispering and pointing. A police cruiser was already parked at the curb, lights flashing against the gray sky. I saw Preston before I saw Leo. He was pinned against the brick wall of the school gate by Mr. Henderson. Preston looked deranged. His suit jacket was torn at the shoulder. His hair was wild, and he was screaming. "He is my son. You can't keep me from my son. I have rights." Mr. Henderson didn't say a word. He simply held Preston in place with a hand the size of a dinner plate pressed against Preston's chest. I rushed past them to the security office where Leo was sitting. He was pale, clutching his backpack, but physically unharmed. I hugged him so hard I thought I might crack a rib. "Did he touch you?" I asked, scanning his face. "No," Leo whispered. Mr. Henderson stopped him. Dad was yelling. "Mom, he said we had to go to the airport. He said we had to leave right now." Flight risk. He was trying to run. And he was going to take Leo as his insurance policy, a human shield to prevent me from releasing the ledger. I walked back outside. The police officers were pulling Preston off the wall, cuffing his hands behind his back. "Caitlin," Preston screamed when he saw me. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. I just wanted to take him for lunch." I walked up to the lead officer. I handed him a folded copy of the emergency custody order and the restraining order the judge had granted yesterday after the threat in my apartment. "Officer," I said, my voice cutting through Preston's hysterics, "Mr. Vance is strictly prohibited from contact with our son or coming within 500 feet of this school. He attempted to remove the minor child from school grounds without authorization. That is attempted kidnapping. The officer looked at the papers, then at Preston. "Get him in the car." "You can't do this," Preston thrashed as they shoved him into the back of the cruiser. "I am Preston Vance. I own this town, Caitlin. You witch, I will kill you." The threat was loud. It was clear. And it was recorded on the body cameras of 2 Seattle police officers and the smartphones of a dozen wealthy parents standing nearby. As the cruiser pulled away, I saw a familiar figure standing near a parked Audi across the street. It was Serena. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a trench coat. Watching the scene unfold, she had likely driven the getaway car, waiting for Preston to run out with Leo so they could dash to the private airfield. She watched the police take him away. She watched the crowd turn their judgment toward her car. Then, she did something that made me smile for the first time that day. She didn't chase the police car. She didn't rush over to plead his case. She pulled out her phone. She typed furiously for a minute. Then she started the engine of the Audi and drove away in the opposite direction. She was cutting her losses, and she was about to monetize the wreckage. I took Leo home. We ordered pizza and built a fort in the living room of the penthouse. I told him that his dad was sick, that the shouting was part of the sickness, and that he was going to go away for a while to get better. It was a kindness I didn't owe Preston, but I owed it to my son. The next morning, the bomb didn't just go off, it incinerated the entire landscape. I woke up at 6 o'clock to a barrage of notifications. It wasn't the Wall Street Journal, it wasn't Forbes, it was the Daily Mail, TMZ, and the Seattle Times. The headline on the front page of the local paper was bold, and black tech tycoon arrested in kidnap attempt, wife claims millions laundered. But the real damage came from the exclusive interview Serena had sold to a national tabloid for what I guessed was $50,000. My nightmare in paradise. How Preston Vance scammed me, his wife, and his investors. Serena had sung like a canary. She had given them everything. The text messages where he mocked his board members, the photos of the cash stacks in the hotel safe in Bali, the conversations she had overheard about cleaning the money for the European syndicate. She painted herself as the innocent whistleblower, the brave young woman who escaped the clutches of a monster. It was a masterpiece of spin, and it buried him. By 9 o'clock, the stock of Vance Ventures had plummeted 40% in pre-market trading. By 10 o'clock, the board of directors held an emergency meeting via Zoom. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. I knew what was happening. They were looking at the cratering stock price, the criminal charges for attempted kidnapping, and the viral allegations of money laundering. At 11 o'clock, a press release was issued. Vance Ventures announces the immediate termination of Preston Vance as CEO for cause. The board has authorized a full independent forensic audit and is cooperating fully with federal authorities. He was fired, and because it was for cause, his golden parachute, the $20 million severance package he always bragged about, was void. He walked away with nothing but the suit he was wearing when he was arrested. By noon, the banks started circling. Preston had lived on leverage. He had personal loans secured by his stock. He had lines of credit secured by his future earnings. With the stock crashing and his job gone, the collateral had evaporated. My friend at Chase Bank texted me, "Margin call issued. We are seizing the accounts." The accounts I hadn't touched, the ones with his remaining personal savings, were frozen by the creditors. The Mercedes he had leased, repossession order issued. Preston Vance had been released on bail late the previous night, before the story broke, using the last of his available cash to pay a bondsman. He had returned to the only place he could afford a short-term rental studio apartment in a gritty neighborhood near the airport, paid for with a prepaid debit card. He was alone, he was broke, he was facing federal charges, and the entire world knew he was a fraud. I spent the afternoon at the park with Leo. Watching him play soccer with some new friends, I felt a lightness in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. The fear was gone, the shadow was lifted. At 6 o'clock in the evening, my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Unknown caller. I knew who it was. I sat on a park bench, watching the sun dip below the Olympic mountains. I accepted the call but didn't say a word. Caitlin. His voice was unrecognizable. It was broken, raspy, dissolving into static. It sounded like a man who had been weeping for hours. Caitlin, please, he sobbed. You have to help me. They took everything. The bank took the checking account. The board fired me. Serena. She told them everything. She lied about me. Caitlin. She said I was laundering money. I listened to the wind rustling the leaves. I listened to his jagged breathing. I have nowhere to go, he cried. I am in a dump on Rainer Avenue. The heat doesn't work. I don't have money for food. Caitlin, I am your husband. We were married for 15 years. You can't let me starve. Please, just transfer me $5,000. Just enough to get a lawyer. Enough to eat. He broke down completely. A guttural, ugly sound of a narcissist encountering consequences for the first time. I am sorry, he wept. I am so sorry about the affair. I am sorry about the money. I will fix it. I promise. Just help me this one time. I will do whatever you want. I will sign anything. Just please, Caitlin, don't leave me like this. I held the phone to my ear. I remembered the email with the vacation photos. I remembered the text where he called me dead weight. I remembered him screaming at our son yesterday. I remembered the missing $2 million from our retirement. I remembered the years of gaslighting, the subtle put-downs, the way he made me feel small so he could feel big. Caitlin, he whispered, his voice trembling with a sliver of hope. Are you there? I took a deep breath. I am here, Preston, I said. My voice was calm, devoid of anger, devoid of pity. It was the voice of a stranger. Oh, thank God, he cried. Thank God. Please, just wire the money to the Western Union on. I am here, I repeated, cutting him off. But the wife you are looking for, the one who cleaned up your messes, the one who believed your lies, she doesn't exist anymore. You killed her. No, don't say that, he begged. I listened to you, Preston, I said. Now you listen to me. You are not a victim. You are the architect of your own hell. You built this brick by brick with every lie you told and every dollar you stole. And now, you are going to live in it. Caitlin, please. Don't call this number again, I said. The next time you hear my name, it will be when the prosecutor calls me to testify against you. Caitlin. No, don't hang up. I love you. I love you. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I looked at the screen for a second. Then I pressed the red button. End call. I blocked the number. I stood up and walked back to the soccer field. Leo saw me and waved. His face flushed with happiness. Mom, watch this, he yelled. He kicked the ball. It sailed through the air, curving perfectly into the top corner of the net. Goal, he screamed. Nice shot. I cheered, clapping my hands. I didn't look back at the phone. I didn't look back at the past. The man in the shabby apartment near the airport was a ghost, and I didn't believe in ghosts anymore. I walked onto the field to hug my son. The air was cold. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't freezing. I was on fire. The courtroom in the King County Superior Court smelled of lemon floor wax and old paper. A sterile scent that did little to mask the underlying odor of anxiety. I sat at the mahogany table, my back straight, my hands folded on top of a thick file labeled Montclair Vance. To my right sat Olivia, radiating a calm, predatory confidence in her charcoal suit. To my left, the gallery was empty save for a few court reporters who had sniffed out the final act of Seattle's most scandalous divorce. I refused to look at the other table until the bailiff announced the judge's arrival. When I finally turned my head, the sight of Preston Vance sent a jolt of shock through me, not because I was afraid, but because he was unrecognizable. The man who had once worn $5,000 custom suits and commanded boardrooms with a raised eyebrow was gone. In his place sat a man in an ill-fitting gray suit that looked like it had been purchased at a discount outlet. His hair, usually dyed and coiffed, was showing gray roots and thinning at the temples. His skin was sallow, the result of stress and sleepless nights in a cheap rental apartment. He didn't look like a titan of industry. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. His lawyer was not from the high-powered firm of Balthazar and Associates. Preston couldn't afford them anymore. Instead, he was represented by a court-appointed attorney named Mr. Beale, a young man who looked overworked and terrified of Olivia. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. Judge Harrelson entered. She was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for having zero patience for histrionics. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and looked at the two parties. "We are here to finalize the dissolution of marriage and determine the division of assets and custody regarding the minor child. Leo Vance," Judge Harrelson said. "Mr. Beale, you may proceed with your opening statement regarding the asset dispute." Preston's lawyer stood up. He shuffled his papers nervously. "Your Honor," Beale began, his voice thin, "my client asserts that the petitioner, Ms. Montclair, engaged in malicious and vindictive conduct. She utilized a power of attorney to liquidate the marital estate, specifically a car collection valued at $8 million and a primary residence valued at $12 million without Mr. Vance's consent. She sold these assets well below market value in a fire sale designed to punish my client. We are asking the court to sanction Ms. Montclair and order her to reimburse Mr. Vance for the lost value." Preston nodded vigorously beside him, finding a spark of his old arrogance. He glared at me, his eyes screaming, "Thief!" Olivia stood up slowly. She didn't need notes. "Your Honor," Olivia said, her voice smooth and projecting to the back of the room. "The respondent characterizes these transactions as malicious. We characterize them as a desperate and necessary rescue operation." Olivia walked to the evidence table and placed a binder in front of the judge. "As the court is aware, Mr. Vance is currently under investigation for wire fraud and embezzlement. At the time Mrs. Montclair executed the sales, she had discovered evidence that Mr. Vance was hemorrhaging marital funds to finance an illicit affair and, more alarmingly, to cover debts associated with offshore gambling syndicates. The evidence in Tab A shows withdrawals totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars in a single month." Judge Harrelson flipped open the binder, her expression unreadable. "Ms. Montclair acted under her fiduciary duty to preserve the estate," Olivia continued. "And the most important question, Your Honor, is where did the money go? Did Ms. Montclair buy jewelry? Did she go on a vacation? Did she hide the cash in a Swiss account like her husband?" Olivia paused for effect. "No. If you look at Tab B, you will see the forensic accounting of every single penny from the sale of the cars and the house." I watched the judge's eyes move down the ledger Olivia had prepared. "Ms. Montclair paid off the mortgage on the marital home, eliminating the debt," Olivia listed. "She paid off the outstanding credit card balances that Mr. Vance had run up. She fully funded a 10-year educational trust for their son, Leo, ensuring his tuition at St. Jude's Academy is paid through graduation, and the remaining balance was placed in a secure, transparent savings account." Olivia turned to look at Preston. "My client didn't steal the money, Your Honor. She saved it. She rescued the family's future from a man who was actively burning it to the ground." Preston slumped in his chair. He knew the truth of those numbers. He knew that if he had kept control of those assets, the cars would have been seized by the FBI or the bank by now, and the equity in the house would have been eaten up by legal fees. Judge Harrelson closed the binder. She looked at Preston over the rim of her glasses. "Mr. Beale," the judge said, "do you have any evidence that Ms. Montclair used these funds for personal luxury or waste?" "Well, no, Your Honor," Beale stammered. "But the intent—" "The intent seems to have been financial survival," Judge Harrelson interrupted. "I find the petitioner's actions to be reasonable asset protection in the face of imminent dissipation by the respondent. The motion for sanctions is denied. The sales stand." I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. The thief label was officially gone. I was the protector. The judge moved on to custody. This was the part that terrified me, despite everything. Preston was Leo's father. Regarding the minor child, the judge said, the court has reviewed the police report from the incident at St. Jude's Academy 2 weeks ago, as well as the video evidence of the respondent's threatening behavior. Preston flinched. The memory of him screaming at us, of the police dragging him away from the school gate, hung heavy in the room. Mr. Vance, the judge said, her voice hardening, your behavior demonstrates a severe lack of judgment and impulse control. You attempted to remove a child from school during a crisis. You have threatened the petitioner. You are currently facing a turbulent legal future. I love my son, Preston whispered. It was the first time he had spoken. His voice was hoarse. I just wanted to see him. And you will, the judge said. But not alone. I am granting full legal and physical custody to Miss Montclair. You are granted supervised visitation for 2 hours every Saturday, to occur at a court-approved family center, pending the outcome of your criminal investigation and a psychological evaluation. Preston put his head in his hands. He had lost his house, he had lost his cars, and now he had lost the right to be a father on his own terms. Finally, but regarding the division of the remaining assets, the judge said, the court acknowledges that 50% of the liquid cash currently held in the trust account would typically be awarded to Mr. Vance. My heart hammered. That was millions of dollars. If he got that money, he could fight me. He could hurt us. However, the judge continued, picking up a new document, the court has received writs of attachment from 3 separate banking institutions and a lien from the Internal Revenue Service. Preston looked up, confused. Mr. Vance, you have defaulted on your personal lines of credit. You have significant tax liabilities due to the unreported income from your overseas activities. Therefore, your share of the marital assets is immediately frozen and will be distributed directly to your creditors to satisfy these liens. The gavel banged. It was a sound like a gunshot, sharp and final. Ms. Montclair retains her 50% share as her sole and separate property. Mr. Vance's share is seized. This court is adjourned. It was a total victory, a clean sweep. I had walked in with anxiety and was walking out with my freedom, my son, and the financial security to start over. But as I stood up to hug Olivia, the double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. It wasn't the press. 6 men in dark windbreakers walked in. They moved with a synchronized, heavy purpose that silenced the room instantly. On the back of their jackets, in bold yellow letters, was the acronym that ends all arguments, FBI. Preston stood up, looking around in confusion. What is this? The lead agent walked straight to the defense table. He didn't look at me. He looked only at Preston. Preston Vance, the agent asked. Yes. Preston's voice was a tremble. I am Special Agent Miller with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. Preston looked at his lawyer. Mr. Beale stepped back, distancing himself from his client. This is a mistake, Preston stammered. I was acquitted. I mean, this is civil court. The indictment was unsealed this morning. Mr. Vance, the agent said, pulling a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. It wasn't my doing. I hadn't called them today. I hadn't given them the hard drive directly. But the article in the tabloid, the confession from Serena, and the bank records I had exposed during the divorce discovery had created a roadmap so clear that the Department of Justice couldn't ignore it. The system I had triggered was now finishing the job. Preston turned around slowly. He looked at me. For months, I had imagined this moment. I had imagined feeling triumph. I had imagined laughing at him, enjoying the karmic justice of seeing the man who called me boring being shackled like a common criminal. But as the metal cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, click, click, I didn't feel joy. I felt a profound, heavy sadness. I looked at the man I had married 15 years ago. I remembered the day we met in college, how bright his eyes had been, how full of promise. I remembered the way he had held Leo for the first time, looking terrified and awestruck. Somewhere along the way, the The greed and the ego had eaten that man alive, leaving only this hollow shell in a cheap suit. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I felt only pity. Pity for a man who had everything and threw it away for a mirage. The agents grabbed his elbows to lead him out. As they turned him, Preston locked eyes with me one last time. The arrogance was gone. The anger was gone. In his eyes, I saw only a terrifying clarity. He realized, finally, that he was truly alone. He realized that the dead weight he had tried to cut loose was the only person who had ever actually loved him. "Caitlin," he mouthed. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a threat. It was a goodbye. I nodded. A small, barely perceptible movement. Goodbye. Preston. They marched him out the side door, toward the holding cells and a federal transport van. The heavy door swung shut, swallowing him into the system. The courtroom was silent. "Are you okay?" Olivia asked softly, touching my arm. I took a deep breath. I felt light. The tether was cut. The weight was gone. "I am," I said. "I really am." I picked up my file. I walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, my heels clicking on the linoleum. I pushed open the double doors to the hallway. The media was there. A pack of wolves with cameras and microphones. They shouted my name. "Mrs. Vance, did you know about the arrest? Caitlin, how do you feel about him going to prison? Is it true you kept the millions?" Flashes popped like lightning. Microphones were thrust in my face. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. I put on my sunglasses, shielding my eyes. I was done explaining myself. I was done managing the narrative for a man who no longer existed in my world. At the end of the hallway, standing near the elevator with Mr. Henderson, was Leo. He looked small in his school blazer, his eyes wide as he watched the circus. He looked scared. I quickened my pace. I walked straight through the reporters, ignoring their questions, pushing past the cameras until I reached my son. "Mom," Leo asked, looking up at me. "Is it over?" I looked down at him. He had my eyes. He had my resilience. "Yes, Leo," I said, reaching out my hand. "It is over." He grabbed my hand. His grip was tight, trusting. "Let's go home," I said. We turned our backs on the cameras, on the courtroom, on the wreckage of the past. The elevator doors opened, and we stepped inside. As the doors slid shut, cutting off the noise of the flashing bulbs, silence descended. But this time, it wasn't the lonely silence of an empty marriage. It was the peaceful silence of a fresh start. The scent of fresh paint and expensive champagne filled the air. But for the first time in 15 years, the party wasn't for Preston. It was for me. I stood in the center of a 3,000-square-foot industrial space in the Pioneer Square district of Seattle. The exposed brick walls were lined with vibrant, chaotic, beautiful abstract expressionist pieces from local female artists. Above the entrance, in sleek, backlit steel letters, hung the name that reclaimed my identity. Montclair Gallery, not Vance, not Mrs. Preston Vance, just Montclair. It had been 6 months since the gavel fell in that courtroom. 6 months since I watched the federal agents lead my husband away in handcuffs. The transition hadn't been easy. It was a forest fire that burned everything to the ground, leaving behind a scorched earth of legal fees, tabloid headlines, and emotional exhaustion. But forests rely on fire to regenerate, and standing here tonight, surrounded by Seattle's art community, I felt like the first green shoot pushing through the ash. I took a sip of sparkling water. I had developed a taste for clarity over intoxication and watched the crowd. They weren't the stuffy, judgmental socialites of Mercer Island who whispered behind their hands. These were artists, collectors, and young professionals. They were here for the art, not the scandal. "Mom," a voice said beside me. I looked down. Leo was wearing a blazer he had picked out himself, a cool dark velvet one that made him look like a miniature art critic. He was holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres. "The catering guy said I could help pass the crab cakes," Leo said, grinning. "Is that okay?" "It is more than okay," I said, smoothing his hair. "Just save one for me." He laughed and darted off into the crowd, moving with a lightness I hadn't seen in years. 6 months ago, he was a terrified boy hiding in a school security office. Now, he was thriving. He was seeing a therapist who helped him process the anger toward his father. And we had moved into a modern, airy townhouse in Queen Anne with a view of the Sound. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have a 6-car garage. But it had warmth. It had laughter. And it had 0 secrets. Preston was currently residing in the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan, Oregon. He had pleaded guilty to 1 count of money laundering and 1 count of securities fraud to avoid the maximum sentence. The judge gave him 5 years. He was also personally bankrupt. The government had seized everything that I hadn't liquidated, the remaining stocks, the 401k remnants, even his future earnings. He called Leo once a week. The calls were monitored and short. Leo was polite but distant. He was learning that biology makes a father, but character makes a dad. As for Serena, the internet had done what the legal system could not. After her tabloid interview, the tide turned against her. People realized she wasn't a victim. She was a co-conspirator who only flipped when the credit card stopped working. She was labeled a gold digger and canceled by the brands she used to influence. Last I heard, she had moved back to her parents' house in Ohio and deleted her Instagram. I checked the time on my phone, 8 o'clock. The opening was a success. We had already sold 4 paintings, but my work wasn't just about selling art. I walked over to a quiet corner where a group of 3 women were waiting. They weren't buyers. They were clients of my new consultancy firm, Phoenix Financial. "Caitlin," one of them said, a woman named Sarah who was currently going through a divorce from a tech executive. "I did what you said. I checked the tax returns. I found the shell company." "Good," I said, touching her arm. "Now, don't confront him yet. Get the documents. Get the forensic accountant I recommended. You need leverage before you need a lawyer." This was my real legacy. I was teaching women how to protect themselves. I was teaching them that financial literacy wasn't boring or man's work. It was armor. It was the difference between being a victim and being a victor. "Excuse me," a deep voice interrupted. "I believe this is the owner of the establishment." I turned around. Standing there, holding a glass of red wine, was Marcus. He looked different than the last time we spoke on the phone. He wasn't in shark mode. He was wearing a charcoal suit, no tie, looking relaxed and surprisingly handsome. "Marcus," I said, offering my hand. "I didn't think art was your thing. I thought you preferred assets with horsepower." "I like anything that appreciates in value," Marcus said, shaking my hand warmly. "And judging by the red dots on the wall, your gallery is appreciating fast." He gestured to a large painting covered by a silk cloth on an easel near the window. "I actually brought a housewarming gift, or a gallery warming gift." "You didn't have to do that," I said. "You already gave me the best gift when you bought that McLaren for cash." "That wasn't a gift," Marcus chuckled. "That was the steal of the century. I should be thanking you." He walked over to the easel and pulled the cloth. I gasped softly. It wasn't a modern abstract piece. It was a vintage oil painting, clearly from the early 20th century. It depicted a ship in a storm. The waves were dark and terrifying, crashing against the hull, but the ship wasn't sinking. It was cutting through the water. Its sails tattered but full of wind, heading toward a break in the clouds where a beam of golden light hit the ocean. "It is called The Weathering," Marcus said quietly. "I saw it at an auction in London last week. It reminded me of someone." I looked at the painting. It was beautiful. It was violent and serene all at once. "It is perfect," I whispered. "Caitlin," Marcus said, turning to me. "I know the last 6 months have been hell. I know you are probably sick of men trying to make deals with you, but I am not Preston, and I am not looking for a deal." He took a step closer. He smelled of expensive cologne and integrity. "I would like to take you to dinner," he said. "Not to talk about cars, not to talk about liquidation strategies, just dinner. There is a new Italian place in Belltown. I promise I won't ask you to sign anything." I looked at him. 6 months ago, standing in my kitchen with the pills scattered on the floor. I had smiled, but that smile had been a weapon. It had been a baring of teeth, a cold, sharp shield against the pain of betrayal. It was a smile fueled by adrenaline and the need for survival. I felt a new smile spreading across my face now. It started in my chest, warm and genuine, and moved up to my lips. It wasn't a smile of revenge. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of peace. I looked at the painting of the ship. I had weathered the storm. I had navigated the waves, and I had landed on a shore that belonged entirely to me. I realized then that the best revenge wasn't leaving Preston broke. It wasn't seeing him in prison. The best revenge was standing here, in my own gallery, looking at a good man, and realizing that Preston Vance didn't matter anymore. He was a footnote, a lesson, a sunk cost. The best revenge was living a life so full, so vibrant, and so authentic that the past couldn't touch it. "Marcus," I said, my voice soft but clear. "That is a very kind offer." He waited, a hint of nervousness in his eyes. "But I am a very busy woman," I teased gently. "I have a gallery to run, I have a son to raise, and I have a financial empire to build." I paused, letting the rejection hang there for a second. Just to test him, he didn't get angry. He didn't push. He just nodded respectfully. "I understand," he said. "However," I added, my smile widening, "I think I might have an opening in my calendar next week. Let me check my schedule and get back to you." Marcus grinned. It was a real grin. "I will wait for your call, Ms. Montclair." The gallery opening wound down an hour later. The guests left, clutching their purchases. The lights were dimmed. "Ready to go, Mom?" Leo asked, his blazer now slung over his shoulder. His tie loosened. "Ready," I said. We walked out to the parking lot. I didn't drive a minivan anymore, but I didn't drive a Ferrari either. I drove a sleek white Porsche Macan, fast, reliable, and completely mine, purchased with my own earnings from the gallery, not from the divorce settlement. We pulled out onto the highway, heading north toward Queen Anne. It had been raining earlier, that classic Seattle drizzle, but the storm had broken. "Look, Mom," Leo pointed out the window. I looked up. The sun was setting behind the Olympic Mountains, casting a golden fire across the clouds and arcing across the gray skyline of the city. Stretching from the Space Needle to the water was a massive, brilliant double rainbow. It was vivid against the dark sky, a bridge of color connecting the storm to the calm. I rolled down the window, letting the cool, clean air fill the car. I turned up the radio. It was playing an old song, something upbeat and full of hope. I looked at my son, who was singing along, tapping his hand on the dashboard. I looked at the city that I had conquered. I wasn't Caitlin Vance, the victim. I wasn't the scorned wife. I was Caitlin Montclair. I was the architect. I was the storm and the lighthouse. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling the road beneath me. The future stretched out like the highway open, unwritten, and entirely mine. "It is a good night for a drive," I said. "It is the best night," Leo agreed. We drove into the light, leaving the darkness in the rearview mirror where it belonged. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed Caitlin's journey from betrayal to triumph, please let us know in the comments below where you are tuning in from. We love connecting with our listeners from all over the world and hearing your thoughts on the story. Don't forget to subscribe to the Crimson Drama Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share these stories with even more people. Your support means everything to us. See you in the next one.